I realized I could create this amazing feminist culture as a fitness instructor, which isn't something I would have expected to have ended up doing.
It's time for you to create your fate. Welcome to today's episode of Create Your Fate podcast. I have a huge treat for y'all today. Andrea Isabelle Lucas is here joining me. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me.
If you don't know who Andrea is yet, you're about to, but she's clearly an Enneagram 3. Because let me introduce everything that you do. You are an author of Own It All, which is a book about stop waiting for change and create the change in your life instead. You are a life and a business coach, a feminist, which I love, founder of Barre and Soul and Barre and Soul Academy. How do you have time for it all?
I make sure I have lots of help, I think.
That's a good one. I like that because there's no way you gotta do it all, but not on your own, right? So
Absolutely.
tell us a little bit about the book. We'll start there because I read it and I loved it. I could not put it down. I listened to it on Audible. It's available on Audible on all the streams. But tell us about writing it, how you came up with it, why it was important to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The book is two things, I guess. One is sharing my story of where I've come from and where I was able to get to, and then sharing the mindset shift that I had to make in order to be able to do that. And, I start with my rock bottom moment, which is when I found myself in an abusive relationship, and I had a real rock bottom moment where I spent the night in the emergency room. And I realized the next morning when I called home to tell my family what had happened, um, that, disturbingly enough, the reaction that my dad had was, "What are you going to do? You can't leave." And that was like obviously not the advice that I needed or was looking for, or probably that any of your listeners would give to their kids. And
Yeah,
and
that's tough to hear.
it was right. So, and I've totally made my peace with it at this point, and I understand that in my dad's world, that's only as um, big as he was, putting the limit on what was possible. Let's say that,
Yeah.
and based on his own life experiences, and I have a lot of compassion for that. And in that moment, I realized, holy crap, no one is coming to save me, and no one's coming to get me out of this mess, and there's no higher authority to appeal to fix this for me. I have to literally take ownership of my life from here on out. And that's where the title Own It All came from.
Yeah, and I love that. I'm telling you, I could not put this book down. So you have to go out and get it. If you're a physical book reader, you can buy it on, is it Amazon? You can buy it anywhere, your website.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
and you even talk about that. I think one of the chapters is forgiveness, and um, it's a book about every aspect of your life. And I was reading your book like, oh my gosh, your mindset, the mindset that goes into this and seeing the change, it's so important. And I read it. I'm like, oh my God, I have to have you on the podcast. So thank you again. But we'll kind of go into what we want to talk about today, which is like those elevated boundaries. It's kind of the theme that we're going for. But when you are owning it all in your life, every aspect, relationships and career and just every aspect of it, you have to protect your energy. So tell us why is that and how is it so important to you for you to protect your energy?
Thank you. Yeah, this was a topic that kind of organically came up between you and I when we were chatting about what to discuss today. And
Yeah.
and I think because it's something I'm presently working with. And what I noticed, one of the things that I keep talking about throughout the book is take the biggest risk you can stomach for today. And meaning just don't get overwhelmed by the end goal or the big picture, but figure out, okay, how far can I push the envelope for today?
Yeah.
And that led me step by step to creating a multi-million-dollar business from literally nothing at the
Yeah.
beginning.
So give us the backstory on that. And I know
Okay.
it's in your book. And again, got to read this book. But how did you, I mean, you have this rock bottom moment. And now you have such a successful business model. Um, Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it honestly started with my rock bottom. It started with getting myself out of that relationship and out of that situation. And as anyone who's fled an abusive situation can tell you, it's not, you don't just snap your fingers and it all just happens. Anyone who's been through a devastating breakup or a divorce or anything like that knows that 90% of it is logistics and figuring out where the heck am I going to live and how am I
Yeah.
going to buy my groceries and whatever else. So, it was just one step at a time. The biggest thing I could muster and do at that time was to leave and start my life over. And I did. And along the way, as I was healing from that, I became a part time bar instructor. And I was also finishing up my women's studies degree because I had my son when I was 19. So I took a really long time finishing college. And so I was about 30 when I did. And I realized that this side hustle I had created for myself in fitness was actually very much a women's empowerment platform. And that the things I was studying in school, my women's studies degree, could totally be applied in the boutique fitness setting. Because in many ways, it's almost like people's church. That's where they go every week, usually multiple times a week. And that's the culture that they're really choosing to surround themselves with.
Mhm.
So I realized I could create this amazing feminist culture as a fitness instructor, which isn't something I would have expected to have ended up doing. But I had kind of an epiphany when I was taking class one day. So I moved my way up the ranks. I actually had an opportunity to buy the studio where I originally taught at, and I was not ready for that opportunity. It wasn't the biggest risk that I could stomach for that day.
Mhm.
It was too big at the moment. And then I had an opportunity to manage a wonderful studio in Boston for a while. And that was the next right step for me. And
Mhm.
after getting some of that experience under my belt, then I was able to go out on my own and create my own business. And, it started with me thinking I could never have a lease on a commercial property because I wasn't wealthy and didn't have a trust fund or some investors in the background. So I thought, okay, well, what can I do? I will start a program out of other people's studios, which led to someone offering for me to buy their studio. And once I had gotten a taste of success with that pretty quickly, I started wanting to open more and more. So I opened 5 within the first 3 years of owning my business.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations on being super successful, but also finding and not but you taught me that in your book. But also and also listening to yourself. If you go back to seeing the success that you have with your 5 studios, what do you think? Would you have ever gotten to where you are now if you had listened to your dad's advice?
I think I would have lived a very sad existence. I mean, in a way, this sounds so wrong to say, but I've always been grateful that things escalated so badly and became violent because it wasn't a situation that I could convince myself to stay in. Whereas
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are low grade miserable in their relationships, but they don't want to leave that safety and they're afraid of the unknown.
Mhm.
So I was sort of forced into the unknown by how bad the situation was. And one of the things that I did right away that I always recommend to someone when they're in a bad situation is just to tell as many people who care about you as possible
Mhm.
because you start to eliminate the option of going back to that. It
Yeah.
becomes too embarrassing and you have too much accountability to actually confront what's happening and deal with it once you start to tell more and more people. And that's one of the things that I did in order to get myself out of that situation.
Right. Yeah, because it's scary, and you're thinking, well, if I tell so many people, then they won't let me go back, or I won't want to tell them I'm going back. It's just a way to take little baby steps, and going back to you, or what is the biggest risk or thought that I can handle today? Maybe it's just telling one person today, right?
Absolutely.
And I love what you said about I'm divorced, but you stay in this, and it was not abusive or anything. He's a great person, but you stay in this mindset where you start to think of all the, well, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to handle this? How am I going to handle this? And if you listen to those voices, for if you let them talk too long, you start to believe all of them. They keep you where you are,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So same kind of thing. You said low grade miserable. And I love that phrase because I think it resonates with a lot of people, even just not in relationships, but in careers, work, everything, all kinds of situations where I think a lot of people, and I know a lot of listeners who listen to this podcast, are low key or low grade miserable in jobs and wanting to do something on their own. So, walk us through, what did you think when you first started entertaining? Wait a minute, I think I might open up my own thing. Like, did you ever think I could never do this? And what crossed over from low grade miserable to owning 5 studios, you know?
Mm, yes. Um, well, I really appreciated and loved very much that opportunity that I had to manage that studio in Boston and the way that it was structured and the way that the schedule worked for that role and the way that I was teaching someone else's method that was really flawless and amazing. I was still kinda getting burnt out because I
Mhm.
needed more creativity. I realized I don't like teaching in just one location to the same people every day, 5 days a week, 3 times a day, and I knew that if I was gonna have a business, I wanted to be in multiple locations because I really needed that variety and, like, adventure.
Yeah.
So, that is actually why I thought it would be a perfect business model to partner with different studios, and it just so happened that someone offered, for me to buy theirs, and then again, knowing in my mind that I was planning to have multiple locations, I began to expand from there pretty quickly.
Mhm.
I would say, when you and I thought about the idea of protecting your energy, I wrote about a lot of things in the book. I wrote about protecting your time or owning your time,
Mhm.
owning your relationships, owning the past. And like you said, we talk about forgiveness and we talk about cleaning up whatever is not feeling right and not feeling good in your relationships. Like these are all things that will hold you back from being able to accomplish the things that you're here to accomplish. So it just no one's going to come along and fix that for you. You really do have to get in front of it and have an internal uh, locus of control
Mhm.
to be able to say, okay, it's on me. And, own your relationships could sound weird, like, oh, dominate everyone. And that's, of course, not what it means
Yeah.
at all. It just means don't wait for that person to come and apologize to you. Don't stay stuck in anger or victimhood, which, I think one of the things that really helped me when I was letting go of that previous abusive relationship, letting go of things that didn't go the way I might have liked with my relationship with my father, for example.
Mhm.
And and I wrote about that a lot in the book. I did something called the Landmark Forum, which is a weekend intensive group coaching experience. And it was really powerful. And I saw there how I had some stories. And I'll just call them victim stories. And I know that could be a controversial term, but of course, bad things had happened to me that we can all probably agree shouldn't have happened. So, nothing wrong with the fact that um, that I was upset about those things or whatever, but being still angry about it 5 years after leaving that relationship wasn't serving me. It wasn't helping me propel myself forward in life. And I was able to really embrace forgiveness as a way to set myself free and free up that energy. So,
Mhm.
again, protecting your energy.
Yeah.
Where do you want it to go? I mean, do you want to cling to being right and making sure everybody knows that that person was wrong and you were right and they treated you badly? I mean, you can do that if you want, or you could use that energy for something else. And
Right.
eventually, at the appropriate time, I think it serves us to move on.
Yeah. It's even, you hear protecting your energy, and that goes right along with boundaries where there's no way you can do all these amazing things in life, even the things that you do, right? And not have boundaries with other people. But I think it also starts, and you and I had talked about this, boundaries with yourself, right? Start there. And
Mhm.
then, there's different levels of boundaries with other people. But protecting your energy from yourself, exactly right. Like, where do you want your energy to go? And that sounds like you have to have a very honest conversation with yourself, you know?
Yes. And you mentioned about where were my thoughts going in the beginning and how did I get them to shift in this other direction? And
Hmm.
one of those was really realizing and getting honest with myself how much I was stuck in being righteous, I guess, about things that had happened to me, and that really wasn't serving me. And then another thing that I think can pollute our energy and pollute our thought space is self-doubt.
Mhm.
And we all have some amount of self-doubt that comes up for us. One of the things that I noticed in just, and maybe this is like a COVID thing and having gone through, the pandemic with a brick and mortar business, and
Yeah.
it was just hard to know the right thing to do from day to day. But I noticed recently that I kept delaying on decisions, and I kept second guessing decisions after I had made them. And I went back to this idea of what is the biggest risk that you can stomach for today. And I thought, why was it easier for me to take risks all those years ago when I had really nothing left to lose?
Mhm.
That was one of the conclusions I came to, is like,
Yeah.
when I was at rock bottom, I didn't have as much to lose. And then after attaining some success, I started to get in my own way, and my thoughts started to get in my way in terms of questioning myself and second guessing myself and things like that. And what I realized is, and I wrote about it in the book, but when you're owning your time, it is imperative that you do say no to some things.
Mhm.
And I noticed that it was easier to take risks when I started with not as much on my plate. And I could just add more and add another risk and add another studio location and
Yeah.
add another business vertical, and I could add and add. And I am at the point where anything that gets added, something does have to get subtracted now. And what I realized is I found it much harder to say no to things and to let things go rather than saying yes to everything and having FOMO about everything.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
That, that's one of the ways that I'm working on protecting my energy right now, is just being really intentional about what I have to say no to, and or what I choose to say no to,
Right.
actually, in order to have the space for the things I want to say yes to. And sometimes I just have to make a decision without obsessing over whether it's the right one.
Mhm.
Rather, trust myself that I'm going to figure it out, whatever's on the other side of this, but that delaying and stalling on those decisions is, it's a choice in itself, right? And it has its own consequences. So
Yeah.
better to just make the decision, make it quickly, and get into action, and rather than continuing to second guess or wonder if
Yes.
if it's the very best thing.
Right, right. You get like stuck on this. Well, is there a better decision out there? Right. Like, I don't want to say yes to this because there might be something better. It's like when I bought my first house in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I feel so bad for my realtor. We must have looked at like 100 houses, right? And um, I had this thing where I was caught up and like, well, what if there's something else better out there for me, you know? And I mean, I looked for probably what, 6 months or something like that. And it ends up being this like miserable loop of always questioning yourself. And that's just like a small example of something tangible that you can see,
Yes.
but it's like you're holding your life up, you
Hmm.
know? And there's a lot of people I know, and this was my scenario too, even when I was quitting my 9 to 5 and hopping into what I really wanted to do, of making that decision where you get stuck, where you're like, what if this doesn't work out? That's so interesting that when you feel like you have nothing to lose, it's easier. You're like, well, might as well. Right. But what
Exactly.
it's like, right? It's like, well, I might as well try that. It can't get any worse. But what needs to happen mentally to when you start getting that success and you do have things to lose to still continue to make those moves? It's
Mm,
like, what goes on in there?
right. Exactly. And making it okay. And it's so funny that you mentioned about the house. And I have a similar example in my book of like, sometimes you just have to make a good enough choice.
Yeah.
Like, okay, good enough. Let's keep moving. Let's not
Yeah.
remain frozen forever in this. In
Yeah.
this.
There's like taboo around that word, like that phrase, good
Right.
enough. Like is it good enough? Right?
Right.
Yes, it is to get forward motion. And you can, because I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't have the perfect plan, everything mapped out. I'm not going to make a move.
Hmm.
So I'm not even going to take one step because I don't know what the next 10 steps looks like, you know?
Right.
And it's like, no, can you take one step? Is that good enough? Well, yeah, it is, but it's like, there's this like taboo around it of like, oh, well, I don't want to settle, you know?
Right.
Uh,
Exactly. And and I think actually settling a lot of times looks like staying, clinging to things that we've created, success we've created for ourselves that maybe we've outgrown.
mhm.
Maybe there's relationships that we've outgrown. Maybe there's a business that you built that you've outgrown or a
Mhm.
role or something like that. So I think there's a certain amount of trusting the universe
Mhm.
that if you are called to something, there's a reason for that and
Yeah.
it's safe and it's not only safe, but perhaps your purpose to just go after that thing and
Yeah.
also trusting yourself and on two levels. One, if this doesn't work out, I'll figure it out, right? Like for me, sometimes I had to say to myself when opening a studio, what's the worst that could happen? I'll be broke. And I have been broke before and I need
Yeah.
to get
I've already
that.
done that. I know how to do it.
Exactly. And then also trusting yourself that your desires are not a joke. They're not frivolous. They're not something silly and foolish for you to just brush aside, but
Mhm.
really trusting um, your inner knowing when it's calling you to something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all goes into just protecting your energy from you, 'cause, you can very easily trick yourself into staying small, into settling, and staying in something like a hermit crab in, like, a little shell that they're trying to outgrow. It's like, "No, no, no, this is comfortable, I like this," right? And your mind
Mhm.
starts to play tricks on you, and I know, you're so into mindset. So, you've I could tell it in your book. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I think, she does this too and this too, and she's read this book and stuff." And I'm like, "This is great." But so that kinda goes into this secondary, how you're protecting your energy is, like, with what you're doing with your time, right?
Mhm.
So I could even just tell, even just from reading your book, like, wow, she has invested a lot of time into personal development,
It's true.
So how did you get into personal development, and why did you think it was so important?
Thank you. That's such a fun topic. And
Yeah.
so when I was in that management role that I was speaking about earlier, and I was teaching 15 fitness classes a week in Boston, and I was really plugged into the Lululemon store
Mhm.
in the area there, and I was an ambassador for them. And they sent me on this really cool retreat in Vancouver, and I noticed that and it was half of us at the retreat were ambassadors and the other half worked for Lululemon. I noticed that the Lululemon people were using lingo that was different, that they all seemed to speak a little dialect of their own. They had a bunch of words that little buzzwords that they would say. And when I came home, I asked my friend about it, who was manager for them,
Mhm.
and she said, "Oh, it's Landmark. Everybody has the option to go to Landmark after they've been here for I forget if it was 6 or 8 months or something at the time." And I said, "Okay, what's Landmark?" And she said, she explained to me that it was this personal development coaching program that the founder had been really into and made it a part of their company culture. And she said, "I wonder if we can send ambassadors. Let me find out." So that was something that they did for me was they sent me to the Landmark Forum. And like I said, it completely opened my eyes to a couple different things. One, to the heavy baggage that I was carrying around, despite having created a lot of success for myself up to that point. There was an energetic weight to what I
Mhm.
was still proving and fighting for and all of that. And and I think I was a really an angry feminist at that time, whereas now I consider myself very inclusive feminist. And before it was like, oh, certain people were a lost cause to me, just like write them off.
Yeah.
And after the Landmark Forum, it just opened up my heart and my mind a lot to have more compassion for how
Mhm.
people ended up the way that they did and to realize that if we want feminism to be something widespread, it's easier if you can get everyone's cooperation rather than fighting
Yeah.
against, you
Right.
know,
Yeah,
this
doing it out of love and not fear and anger, and making it,
totally
very intentional with positive intention behind it. And I love that.
way. It's a whole different energy and it just feels you feel different on the inside when you're coming from that place.
Mhm.
And it just feels so much more empowered. It feels so, whether it's right or wrong, kind of it doesn't even matter. It's just how does it make you feel and does it empower you? And for
Mhm.
me, it really empowered me to actually choose compassion, choose forgiveness, and choose to fight for something great and not
Yeah.
against something that I
Yeah.
hate.
That's awesome. And I love that so much because, um, I one of my aspects of coaching is getting people to even have consciousness of and getting to see how much of your life are you focusing on what you don't want, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm making a decision where someone can sit down and say, well, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want to do this. I'm like, yes, you have defined this so well. You've talked the whole time about what you don't want, but tell me what you do want, right? And it's kind of the same thing where it's like, no, like, tell me what you're fighting for, not against. Tell me what you stand for, not what you're against. And because when you focus on what you are for, you can start spending more time focus on that, right? Not running away or being angry at what you're against. And then you find people similar to the whole Lululemon culture. You don't need a Lululemon culture to do this, but once you start focusing on what you're for, then you start attracting people who are also for that, you know? That's another way to protect your energy is what are you doing with your time? But who are your people? You know? So
100%.
yeah, why is, people um like kind of another massive ingredient in this whole little mix of growth and personal development?
I think that the conversations that we have in our heads are very powerful. As we've been talking about, the things we say to ourselves
Mhm.
are really important, and they are ultimately where we make the decisions about what we're going to do, whether we're going to go for it or hold ourselves back. And I think what really feeds and breeds all of those inner thoughts, that inner monologue, are the conversations that we have with
Mhm.
other people. And sometimes a conversation is a book that you read, and
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah.
read my book and you were like, "Wow, I appreciated this conversation that I just had with Andrea about these topics."
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
right? So it can be any kind of media that you consume, can have that kind of power and that effect.
Mhm.
It could be a podcast that you listen to, of course. And the people that are immediately in your life that you're speaking to on a regular basis, if I was surrounding myself with people who responded to abuse with, "Well, what are you gonna do? You can't leave," I would stay very stuck.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if that was the kind of messaging, that I was getting. So I think when you have a choice about who you're surrounded with, you really want to choose wisely. And for me, I've also just noticed you can love someone a lot and care about them and respect them and realize that the relationship is still costing you too much,
Mhm. Mhm.
whether that's a friendship or a professional relationship or a love relationship or a family relationship. Those are the hardest
Yeah.
because, in my opinion, family are never really gone. Even if you say, I'm going to cut this person out of my life, like,
Yeah.
there's a piece of you that's still pretty attached. So that's probably the hardest one to navigate. And that's
Yeah.
where boundaries are so important. But
Mhm.
I do think that the things we are saying out loud and that people are saying back to us in our conversations, ultimately, that creates, frankly, the reality or the perception of reality that we're working from
Yeah.
and that we're making our choices from.
Right. No, I think you nailed it right there. It's so spot on. It's because you are creating energy, right? So if you're protecting your energy and creating energy at the same time, then those two you want to be synergistic with each other. Where, again, going back to your first situation that you mentioned when you were leaving and wanting to leave, you're like, hey, I'm going to tell as many people as I can because that's my biggest risk that I could take that day, right? The step that I could do but also, you're doing all this stuff on yourself. Like you finally talk yourself into like this big step, like I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
And those people had you told all these people and everyone would have been like, no, stay, you have to stay, you have to stay. That's conflicting. And that makes it even harder. And the voices in your head just start to get really confused and really loud, you know?
hmm And
So
that's where you really need to be intentional about who you're talking to,
mhm,
and especially when you're talking about things that are so important,
mhm,
like your major life decisions. You have to be selective or you get to be selective
mhm.
about who you're going to share with. Some people are very risk averse and they are just trying to protect you and they might love you a lot, but they might shut down your big ideas
Mhm.
and try to, squash it as fast as they can and say,
Yeah.
no, maybe you shouldn't do that. And so you have to think about that, I suppose, if you
Yeah.
want to create the kind of energy that is going to support your heart's desire.
Yeah, and finding people, you know, boundaries with how you spend your time and who you're spending your time with. It's finding those like-minded people, right? Who aren't going to like poo-poo your ideas just because they're not a bad person. They
Right.
just are completely just different. It's a different mindset. So you're not going to go to someone, let's even just say, hey, even something with fitness, something fitness related to someone who I'm not going to go ask you a question about bar if you don't do bar, you know? It's like not going to people just for an extra opinion, right? Like, oh, if I ask 10 people, then at least one of them will tell me what I want. It's like, no,
Mm,
be intentional with it and go to people who can actually help you and are like minded. So,
exactly. And I feel like, there's something to be said for going to people who are going to tell you what you want to hear. I think that's what we pay coaches for a lot of the
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's like I need a cheerleader. I need someone I know I can count on for that pep talk. And that's
Hmm.
a really beautiful and powerful thing. And it's so great to just be mindful of that. And, what I've noticed is some people are going to uh, come from their own limitations, their own experience, their own trauma, and have
Hmm.
reasons to shut down or to not see what's possible when you share with them. I've also noticed that people tend to generally be agreeable. So that's another thing that I think is really powerful. And not only choosing who you share with, but choosing the things that you say. Because if you go around to everybody in your world and you say, gosh, I would love to work out more, but honestly, who has time? People are going to be like, you're so right. I know
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
just
yeah. No
not enough
time.
hours in the day. Right. Or
Yeah.
if you're like, you know what? It's too important to not make time for. I'm going to do it. People are going to be like, yes, exactly. You can make time.
Right.
So
Right.
find
They're
out.
cheerleaders too of anything that you say. Like, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
totally.
That's such a good point though, because you're so right. You're see me. Yeah, yeah, you're right. But people are agreeable. So even being, protecting your energy, but protecting the words that you say and how you say it, right?
Exactly.
And words are basically your thoughts resonated into the physical, speech. But um I think, especially as an NLP practitioner, so neuro linguistic programming, is really talking about how important your words are in shaping the life that you want, right?
Mhm.
Again, not focusing on what you don't want or what you're against, but what you do want. So you had something in your book that I absolutely loved. It was and not but. So talk to us about that because I thought that was really powerful for creating this energy of what you want.
Okay. So imagine if I said, I want to have the most successful month in my business that I have ever had, but I need a vacation and I want to go on this trip next week. I'm acting like I can't have both. So, like, the but is like the delete key that
Mhm.
is backing out the first thing that you said.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say and, it creates possibility. So,
Mm.
I want to have the best month in my business that I have ever had. And I need a vacation and I want to go away next week. Well, what the hell? Now you're playing a different game because now you're playing to win both of those rather
Right.
than one.
Yeah, and I love that because it forces you to start thinking of solutions and generate ideas of how is this going to work out for me, you know? And I love that. It's the best of both worlds. And I think a lot of people out there don't think that they can have the best of both worlds, Where it's like I have to, I don't get along with this family member, so I have to keep them in my life and I have to see them and talk to them X amount of times per week or anything. And I don't know. What do you think keeps people from exploring options of boundaries? Because they can be pretty difficult.
I think a couple different things. One, I think we just have a tendency to create false binaries where we think there are only two paths and that it's everything feels like a fork in the road where
Yeah.
I have to either do this or that. I have to choose between this or that. Yeah, right. There are millions of possibilities at any given moment. And
Yeah.
we tend to focus on two things and try to choose between them. So
That's
I think
interesting. I've never thought of that, but that's spot on. You're like, well, it's either this or that. I'm either going to stay in my job or start my own business. Like,
right.
well, there's a bunch of different things in between that, you know,
Exactly.
where I
Yeah, you
have
could go
to,
work on a cruise ship. Like you could do anything.
yeah, anything that you want, right? Or it's either um I'm going to be happy or like I'm going to stay in this job that pays me well and be miserable or start my side gig and be happy but, broke for a long time. And it's like, well, why are you if those are the only options that you're thinking in your head, then you are literally creating just those two options and nothing else. Right. So then
Mhm.
your words are going to reflect the two options that you create versus all these other possibilities. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and I think that's another way that coaching and personal development are so helpful because a coach is going to question that and be like, "Well, why? Why do you have to choose between those two? What if you
Hmm.
could have both of those things, you know?"
Hmm.
But I think the other thing that makes boundaries challenging is that we are afraid of having air quotes difficult conversations. So if
Mm-hmm.
we think a conversation is going to be difficult, we will try to avoid having it. Meanwhile, we're bitching about it probably to different people in our lives and
Yeah.
we're complaining about, our boundaries not being respected rather than just going to the source and having the conversation that maybe we're not looking forward to having.
Hmm.
And we all do it. I'm still catch myself doing it from time to time. And, I still continue to discover that when I have maybe unconsciously been delaying a conversation for a while, a lot of times I've been trying to manipulate and control the outcome and
Hmm.
figure out exactly how can I have this conversation and have it go exactly how I want it to go and get
Hmm.
the ending that I wanted. And I'm reminded all the time that a lot of times the way the conversation goes is in a different direction than what you ever even would have pictured.
Hmm.
So wasting all this energy trying to control the outcome is not worth it. And the
Hmm.
thing we're dreading and running from, it's better to just stop, surrender, have the conversation, and
Yeah.
kind of let the chips fall.
Right. And even going back to protecting your energy, it's like, hey, I'm going to put off having this difficult conversation because I don't want to be in that negative energy, right? I don't have that kind of negativity for my life or whatever. And, but if you actually sit down and think about it, it's like you are thinking about that conversation that you're putting off until you actually have it. So you're actually putting yourself through more energetic misery, we'll call it. Be You're spending more energy on it and you're creating this situation that you don't want and you're living in it longer than, okay, I'm gonna have this tough conversation and then it's gonna be over, and you don't have to think about it anymore.
Such a great way to put it. Exactly. We're torturing ourselves with the energetic misery of not having the conversation
Yeah.
rather than just getting it over with and trusting that if you're coming from a place of love and if you want everybody to win,
Mm-hmm.
how bad could it go?
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of tying in our point from before of focusing on what you want, right? And what are you for? Right? I'm going to fight for something and not against something. I'm going to have this conversation, this difficult conversation based on being for something, not against. Um yeah, I think that's totally necessary when it comes to protecting your energy, with yourself first, right? Always yourself first and then with your time and your environment and then with the people who are in your life. Um what do you think is What do you think is the hardest part about protecting your energy and creating those boundaries? Like, is it people are scared that they're going to be lonely, that they're not going to have anybody left, or what is it that you're like gets people get to the like little step and you're like, oh, I'm not really quite sure. Like, I'm not going to do it yet. Like, no, I want to stay safe. But is it fear? What?
A good question. I think we fear a lot of times not being liked,
Hmm.
probably a lot more than we admit to ourselves and
Yeah.
certainly out loud to anyone else. I noticed, and probably a lot of folks can relate to this, during the pandemic, it was utterly impossible to have a popular opinion.
Yes.
You know what I
Very
mean?
much so.
Every opinion was unpopular with somebody and like passionately so. And as a leader and as a business owner and as someone with dozens of staff and thousands of clients and social media followers and everything, it was impossible to be liked all the time. And
Hmm.
I had to really learn to stand in my integrity
Hmm.
and just trust and believe that I was making the best decision that I could with the information that I had and with the values that
Hmm.
I have. And it's not going to be for everybody. You're not going to be for everybody. And sometimes people aren't going to like you. and they are going to have an issue with what you're doing or your opinion or anything else. And I think letting go of the need to be liked by everybody universally
Mhm.
is huge. I think people really fear haters, and it's a very powerful force that probably keeps us from wanting to be visible
Mhm.
more than we realize as well. I heard a quote somewhere that when people talk about wanting to build their following, whether it's on social media or for a podcast or whatever, I heard a quote once that said something to the effect of your size of your following. Oh, basically, you don't have a bigger audience because you're not ready for it yet. You're not
Mm.
ready for that yet. You haven't come to the place where you can accept the amount of, we'll just say, haters
Yeah.
or unpopular opinions or
The
trolls or whatever
trolls, yeah, the
else.
trolls are out there.
Exactly.
They are.
Exactly. Until you're ready to be okay with that and stand in your integrity and not have that threaten your sense of self,
Mhm.
probably you're going to find ways to self sabotage and not put yourself out there out of fear.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I think and you're so right. You can you especially during COVID, there was just never you just didn't know. It was the best decision at the time. I did you had to trust, well, I made the best decision I could for the time I didn't know, right? Like
Right.
we did the best we could kind of thing. But, that saying that you are not for everybody and everyone's not for you, like everyone is not for you. Well, everyone's not for you, but also everybody is not for you. Like they don't want you to succeed and if you do not have boundaries, if you don't accept boundaries of not everybody is for me, meaning I'm not for everybody. So I'm not going to accommodate everybody into the way I form my opinions, the way I make my moves, the way I protect my time. And it's, you know, I'm an Enneagram 7 and we have FOMO like no other. And I used to be, this person who's like, okay, I'm going to spend 20 minutes with this person. I'm going to leave and go an hour here and blah, 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 and ask this person for this advice and then this person and 10 other people. And it was just always like the more the merrier, I said in my head. But really, it was just me being afraid of boundaries
Mhm.
and letting everybody have access to me. Right. And I thought that I had to accommodate and appease everybody. And then what I realized, and you said this was values, you have to stick true to your values and your integrity. But I had not identified those for a very long time. So you're like, yeah, that sounds great. And then 10 minutes later, another opinion. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds great. But really, it's like, what is the best for you? Right. And who knows that the best is you, you know?
Exactly. And how did you turn that corner where you began to be willing to create those boundaries and honor your own values?
You know what? Honestly, I think it was just, I got tired of I don't feel like me. And I don't feel like me because I'm putting so much of other people into who I was, you know, not pretending to be, but who I was, I guess, allowing myself to be. Right. And I would notice that I would even shape shift a little bit from group to group to group. And it just started feeling like very inauthentic and out of integrity with myself. But, until you sit down and you say, hey, what's going on? You don't know. It just, something feels off where it was like, well, if I was this way with this group of people, they wouldn't like me. But with this group of people, I'll be this way. It's like, well, who am I? Right. And you have to ask yourself, who am I? And a lot of times you are how you spend your time. You are who you are around. So if you don't have boundaries and if you can't identify who you are, you're like, okay, that's kind of a sign. I think you said this when we talked earlier. It's time to prune, right?
Mhm.
Pruning is, and I love that phrase. It's like it's time to prune because not everybody is going to come with you, right? Not everyone's for you. So,
Exactly.
how do you think you start the pruning process of saying, no, I don't want to spend my time this way, or this person's not for me?
Well, notice how you feel after you've been interacting with them.
Hmm.
Honestly, if you find yourself obsessing over trying to make this person feel better and trying to say the right thing, and oh, are they upset with me? And I think, and then how does it feel to have those thoughts? Does it Because sometimes someone will come to me with a problem and I'm so excited to help them solve it. And I am thinking about it and I feel good about it energetically. It feels
Mhm.
good in my body to try to help them troubleshoot. And I feel like I'm being of service and I feel helpful. Other times I feel drained and it's like this person, I've given them my thoughts, my advice, I've listened, and they don't seem ready to break out of this rut that they're in.
Mhm.
Or they're always hurt or offended and I find that I'm always apologizing and
Yeah.
explaining my intentions or what have you. If you're hanging up from the phone or getting that text and you're just feeling icky
Mhm.
and drained by that, I think that's a really good sign. And sometimes it's just that there's something there for you to say that you haven't been saying, and other times it's just that where this person is at in their journey is not really a match for where you're at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point of, are you on the same wavelength with people? And it's not always, no, we're not, and we're never going to be. It's maybe I'm growing faster than this person, or this person is growing faster than I am, right? It's kind of this
Mhm.
two-way thing. But I think there's a lot of guilt also associated with that
Mhm.
of, well, I feel like I should be here for this person. I'm a bad person because I'm not, I don't feel great about wanting to help them,
Mm.
and it's like, again, those two choices, it's like this or that. It's like, no, 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 there's a lot of other things that are attributing to this.
Yes, that's such a good. I'm glad you brought up the word guilt because you're right. I think that is what holds a lot of folks back from having the boundaries that they want to have, which ultimately comes down to not feeling worthy of having those boundaries or
Hmm.
feeling that you owe it,
Mm.
you owe somebody your time. And I guess, that's something to just unpack and look at and question. There's there's a lot to be said for helping folks. And there's also billions of people on the planet. You're not going to help every single one of them.
Hmm. And
And
you
and
can't
you
do
can't.
it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So then who are you here to be aligned with at this time?
Hmm.
And yes, exactly. Some folks are going to definitely stay in your life because they're a family member, because they work in your office and you love that job otherwise, and what have
Yeah.
you. Um, because they are the IRS and you're getting audited. Like who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. I
You
feel
know
like
what
there's
I
always
mean?
those types of people you're like, oh, they're always going to be there.
Yeah,
But
exactly. So I think that's where, yeah, creating the boundaries comes in and just knowing where where your values lie,
mhm.
what you're comfortable with and what you're not. And not every boundary has to get communicated out loud. You could just say to yourself, I'm not going to answer text messages during my workday, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
That's a boundary that you create within yourself. And it's like, yes, I love my friends and I love that they want to chat with me. And between these hours, I'm going to be working and I'm not going to respond and get sucked into beside conversations
Right,
until
right.
later in the day when I choose things like that.
Yeah, and that's owning your decisions right there,
Mhm.
is owning your boundaries, but and not apologizing for them. It's, these
Like,
are my boundaries because this is my life, and if you stick within your values and you always come back to your authentic integrity, once you start to identify that, it's like, I actually don't mind that this person doesn't like me because we are completely opposite. I mean, obviously, you treat everybody with kindness and respect, but I don't need this person to like me
mhm,
or feel like that they are aligned with me because we are actually not aligned on so many different ways. And knowing that you can make that decision and it doesn't make either of you a bad person, it's just like, nope, that person is just not for me, and that's
mhm.
okay.
Right. And I think a lot of it does come down to worthiness, really feeling worthy to own your time,
Hmm.
worthy to have boundaries, worthy to not overinvest your energy into how other people feel or what they think of you and
Hmm.
things like that. And worthiness it's a huge um, topic that we could spend definitely a
Yeah.
whole other podcast
Another, yeah.
episode on,
Tune in
right?
for episode 2.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think ultimately there is just no reason why anyone else on the planet is more worthy than you,
Mhm.
period. There's nobody who, it's not like the Academy Awards. There's no Academy who's
Yeah,
out
the
there that
Academy of Worthiness.
exactly.
Yeah. That's so true, though. I've never heard it, phrased so eloquently and just so bluntly, nobody else is more worthy than you. Period.
Right.
It's like,
I don't
that's
think anybody's more worthy than anybody.
no.
That's personal belief.
I mean, I agree with that entirely. It's you are a soul, you are a human, you are here. You have value simply because you exist, where that's it. Right? And
Exactly.
we put all these things in our head of what makes people more valuable, whether it be, financially or physically or whatever it might be. But it's no, that's totally made up in our own heads. So, um, well, one last question for you, and just going back to your book because I really cannot stress to everybody enough. Like, you have to read this book. It's awesome, and you narrate yourself, which I always love that. And you do a great job. But
Thank
what was your favorite chapter in your book?
Ooh. Own Your Legacy was probably my favorite chapter because ultimately, I think it's creates this overarching sort of umbrella where you get to find the boundaries that you need. You get to find what your values are. If you start at the end of your life and work backwards and think
Mhm.
about how do you want to be remembered? What is the impact that you want to have made? It makes other choices and decisions easier. It makes it easier to say no to some things if you know what you're working toward and what's the
Yeah.
legacy that you're trying to build, what you've decided you're here to do. So I think that one's my favorite.
Yeah. That kind of wraps up everything that we've been talking about too. It's like your legacy is around what you're for and what you're spending your energy on, and your boundaries are all encapsulating with this, and in order to protect that, right? You're not focused on saying no to all these things. It's really like, what are you a yes for? Like your legacy. So I love that. So
Well, and it makes it easier to take risks when you feel like you're taking risks in service
mhm,
of a greater good. So, for example, public speaking, it's scary for most of us.
mhm,
Anytime I'm about to get on stage, I just pause and tell myself someone needs to hear what I'm about to say.
mhm.
And that makes it easy for me to forget about looking good or if I say something stupid or if
Yeah.
somebody's going to walk out in the middle of my talk or whatever.
Right.
Because at that point, it's not about me. And
Right.
I can kind of just get my ego out of the way.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna personally use that myself. So thank you for sharing that. But no,
Totally.
that's so powerful. It's, hey, I'm here with a purpose, and somebody is going to hear what I'm saying. And I always love that when I do some type of event or podcast, even where, or even like, you can get caught up. Your ego, nailed it perfectly, but your ego gets caught up on the numbers, like these vanity numbers of how we measure success. And I mean, that's even coming from a fitness background, how many people are in your class compared to other people's, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's like, oh man, like you could focus on what you don't have. Like, oh, I don't have this many people didn't see it or this many people didn't come. And it kind of checks you. I've had this experience multiple times in the past where it's like you find yourself getting caught up on that, but then one person comes up to you and they're like, I really needed to hear this today or whatever it was. And you're like, oh, okay, that's what it's all about, and focusing on that. So
Totally.
awesome.
100%.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for saying yes and allowing us to create this energetic experience together. I really appreciate that. I know you are busy because you do all the things, all the things. Um, so I'm going to add all your tags and everything in the episode so people can find you because I know they love you. They want to read your book. They want to find you. So how can people find you? Where should we go?
I would love for you to sign up for my newsletter. I send it about once a month. I try to make sure that there's something really useful and
Awesome.
actionable. So the link to that, you can find that either on my website, AndreaIsabelleLucas.com, or on my Instagram, also Andrea Isabelle Lucas. If you have a question or if you just want to say hi, definitely DM me and just pop in and I'd love to connect.
Yay, awesome. Well, Andrea, thank you so much again. This has been awesome, and I know so many people just got so much benefit from this. So thank you. And yeah, I just can't stress it enough. Go read her
Thank
book.
you. Thank you
Just
so much for having me. This was a great experience for me too. And I'm excited to get to know all of your listeners.
I know, yes. So they'll be coming to your page. So I always end a podcast uh one certain way. So if you want to say this with me, I would love it. I always end with expect good things always, and they will happen. So there's power in numbers, there's power in spoken word, there's power in like minded saying it together. So if you would you say it with me?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. I'll give us a countdown. Three, two, one. Expect
Expect good
good
things,
things
al
always,
and
and they
they will
will
happen.
happen. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, and we will talk to y'all soon.
Thank you.